Hello fellow kaiju fans, it is I, GPTV, and today I'm going to be reviewing every single Godzilla movie in one video. Yeah, this is going to be a long one. It's been a long time since I've watched basically all of these movies, so I was really looking forward to rewatching them. I gotta make sure I'm not a fake fan! Instead of giving them a score out of 10 or ranking them, I'm gonna be putting them in different categories of great, good, mid, and bad. I gotta be vague so when I upload this video I don't immediately regret every ranking I give everything. Let's begin. Godzilla 1954. It makes sense why this movie is as iconic as it is. The first half of the movie feels like the typical monster movie, but the second half creates such a noticeable contrast. It sets up the situation in a realistic way by showing the perspectives of so many different people throughout the story. It not only captures the destruction and horror of a true monster, but it also captures the destruction and devastation of a nuclear bomb. The effects in the movie are also really impressive. For example, there's a scene where Godzilla is lumbering above a building and you see people in them, and then there's another shot where he fires his atomic breath at a cop car with people inside it, and it blows up with the people still inside it. As good as the destruction scenes are, though, my favorite scene in the movie is by far the prayer for peace. It's so moving and well done. Serizawa is such a good character, it still shocks me that he wasn't the main one. I like how his death feels more like a sacrifice than a crazy suicide. Easily this movie goes in the great category, cause like, come on. Godzilla raids again, one of the most hated movies in the franchise. I tried watching it while I was younger and I know I fell asleep at some point. Giving it a proper rewatch, I was honestly a little impressed. With just the Godzilla and Anguirus fight. The action was very unique, the more animalistic movements were pretty cool. The rest of the movie, however, was very weak. The characters were very forgettable for the most part, besides of course the evil Three Stooges. It was just a boring story with an ending that felt like it went 10 minutes way too long. You could tell it was rushed and it really suffers from it. I'm glad it exists because without it we may have never had another Godzilla movie. But I'm afraid this is a bad movie. At least it has the Anguirus song! King Kong vs. Godzilla was not only a step up in quality, but a pole vault. The characters were far better with good setups and payoffs all around. Mr. Taka was especially entertaining and very memorable. The movie was also very funny, having its best moments when the team first lands on Skull Island and when Mr. Taka was trying to stop the detonation of Kong on the boat. The overall story is great, having good commentary on exploitation in media. And the massive sets with lots of extras really do make it feel big. The miniature quality in this was also top notch as well. The visual effects in this were also very good, having lots of great composite shots with the octopus. The only real special effect that looked bad was Kong himself, which is ironic considering the best effect in the movie was definitely Godzilla's suit, as it does not look like a person is in that thing at all. And the music was also top notch. This was a good movie. Mothra vs. Godzilla. It continued the step up of quality from the last movie, although I didn't enjoy it quite as much. Despite this, the sets were once again large and well done. The human characters were just as fun and enjoyable. The story was just as engaging as the last one, with just as good of a message. The music was really well integrated, the fights were well choreographed, and the movie was simply really funny. The egg guy made me laugh out loud a few times. Not that egg guy, the egg guy in the movie. Come on. The reason I didn't like the movie as much is because it kind of falls apart at the end. The fight against the larvas goes on for way too long. Not to mention the layering of singing over the actual soundtrack just sounds really weird. Still a good movie. Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster is a very interesting one. It was good, don't get me wrong, but I was surprised how things were handled. I never thought I'd say this, but the human part of the story was way more interesting than the monster one. Which is especially weird to say when it's the introduction of Godzilla's archenemy, King Ghidorah. And it's not like the monster plot was bad, the human plot just overshadowed it so much. It was so convoluted and interesting, I was really invested. Seeing the Mothra twins interact with the plot was really cool. Usually they just sit there and be like, Mothra is coming. But now they're like, you know, turning off the lights to stop gunmen? That's kinda awesome. Whereas the monster stuff just did not stand up to the quality of the last two movies. Godzilla and Rodan's fight was just cartoonish, and the scenes of the monsters talking just completely destroyed any realism set up by the movies prior. It transitions into the future of Godzilla as a hero pretty well, but it transitions out of the past of Godzilla as a villain pretty poorly. Ghidorah was awesome though. Overall, I'd still label this a good movie. Invasion of Astro Monster. I feel very similar towards this movie as the last one. I really do enjoy the character side of things. The Zillions were pretty cool alien villains. Except when you could see their eyes through the sunglasses. That was kinda horrifying. The story with the rape whistle guy. I don't remember his name, I just remembered that about him. Like, that's it. Like, of course that's all I'm gonna remember. He was entertaining though, is what I'm getting at. That's like, I remembered that over the name, you know? I could Google it, but it's too late. The monster stuff just did not stand out as much compared to it. And didn't feel as grand. Godzilla and Rodan's rampages were cool, but Ghidorah's rampage was a lot more underwhelming than the last movie. I do give the film credit though for taking them to space. Putting Godzilla on a foreign planet, it's something that's only happened once, and happened in, what is this, like the 6th movie? And where the last movie took away the ability to take the monster seriously, this movie just tears that apart by having Godzilla dance. Like, it's just gone. This was a good movie though. Ebirah Horror of the Deep is pretty unique. It's one of only 2 Godzilla movies, with a terrorist group as one of the villains. Well, it's something that's part of nearly every action movie today. Back then, it wasn't nearly as common, especially in Toku. It leads to a pretty memorable plot. As for the characters, I don't really remember them or care for them, except the criminal guy. I liked it. It was also nice to see Infant Island again. I like how present they were in the early Showa movies. The monster stuff in this movie is also pretty good. It's the first water fight in all of Godzilla, and I think they did a pretty decent job for a first time. It's just a little underwhelming getting Ebirah after King Ghidorah for 2 movies. 2 movies of a planet terraforming gigantic space dragon to a shrimp. Still a good movie. Son of Godzilla was laugh out loud funny. And the best part is that it was intentional. All the scenes with Manila were hilarious. It's overall just a pretty decent movie. The story is once again pretty unique, the monsters look great, and all the characters are pretty fun. The ending was also honestly very sweet. As per usual, this is a good movie. If you be hating on Son of Godzilla, destroy all monsters. I was really looking forward to rewatching this one, and I ended up coming out very mixed. On the one hand, the monster stuff is easily the best it's been up until this point. The rampage through Tokyo is awesome, the team-up fight against Ghidorah is so cool. But on the other hand, for the first time since Raids Again, the human stuff was honestly pretty boring. Obviously not nearly as bad as Raids Again, but not nearly as good as the last 6 movies. The monster stuff does make up for it though, so this one still goes in good. Godzilla, Manila, Gabra, all monsters, attack! I actually really liked this movie.
I know. No, I'm serious. I do. It's good. No, it'll settle down. Put it down. Put that. No. Stop. Guys, we can talk about this. We can discuss. We can discuss this.
Sure, it features a little kid, but it actually has meaning to the story instead of something like Gamera. It's a story about how much Godzilla meant to kids at the time who were kind of left to themselves. It may use stock footage, but honestly some of the fights were edited to be a lot better than the originals, especially aided by the new awesome soundtrack. Also, watching the Japanese version really helped me enjoy Manila in this movie. His voice actually matches the roar, and not in an annoying way. It's actually kind of neat. Not to mention Gabara was really fun. I could safely say this is a good movie. It would be great if I didn't hate kids. Godzilla vs. Hedorah was another movie I was really looking forward to rewatching. I hated it when I was little, and a lot of my friends are now saying it's one of their favorites, and I could safely say it is also now one of mine. This is easily the best monster stuff in any Godzilla movie up until this point, and is some of the best in the entire franchise still. There's such unique cinematography and some of the coolest Godzilla entrances there are. Hedorah was portrayed so well, and is easily the biggest threat Godzilla has fought. The human story was its only weak part. For a movie that feels like the end of the world, more focus on the human characters would have allowed us to feel the horror of the situation better. There were also a few scenes that dragged out way too long, like Hedorah walking to the lights. Despite this, I am still putting the movie in great. It just gets the monster stuff so right. Like Godzilla flies, and it's awesome. Like, come on! I do want to know who put the baby in the sludge, though. It's a little concern. Godzilla vs. Gigan was boring. A real sleeper, if you will. The human story is mildly interesting, but it just feels like there's no substance to it. Just a group of people who feel like stopping some bad guys! Gigan is cool, but the fights and destruction scenes just have so much stock footage that doesn't match, that it really takes you out of it. It also just feels really heartless. This movie is mid. Godzilla vs. Megalon was slightly better than the last. It's not boring, as there's a lot more action in it. However, I still have no idea who the characters are and why I should care about them. The fight is fun, but the characters are so sidelined that it just feels off. It would have been so easy to fix this by giving them control over Jet Jaguar during the fight. This movie is also mid. Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla. I don't understand what happened with the last 2 movies, because this one puts them to utter shame. It does a lot of the same things as the last couple, but does them so much better. Instead of having one big fight at the end of the movie, it has 3 spaced throughout was just so much for the pacing. The character story is way more interesting and it's also way more fun. The aliens are great as well. MechaGodzilla is an incredible monster villain, and the fights with him are beautiful. The fight against fake Godzilla genuinely is incredible. The final fight is also really fun. This is a great movie. Terror of MechaGodzilla. It's a shame this is the final film in the Showa era, because it finally feels like they figured out how to do Godzilla right. The fights are some of the best yet, and the character story finally feels like it's reaching near the quality as the ones in the 60s again. You really feel the power of the monsters in the destruction scenes, and it was cool seeing Godzilla get outmatched by the Mega Monster tag team. And giving MechaGodzilla the second head was really smart. Biggest issue with the film though is it didn't have multiple fights throughout like the last one did, and it really does screw with the pacing. The Showa era ends with a good movie. The Return of Godzilla is another example of a Godzilla movie that gets the monster stuff perfect. Godzilla's rampage in this film is easily one of the best in the entire franchise. The effects on display are 1,000 times better than those of movies prior, and Godzilla's design is awesome. It's such a cool, menacing update of the Showa look. The human side of the story in this movie isn't particularly interesting. However, it's not handled badly, if you know what I mean. The scenes of the Cold War tension with the Prime Minister really add to the tension of the movie. Not to mention the scene where the Soviet nuke is accidentally launched. It leads to some of the most hauntingly beautiful imagery in any Godzilla film. The way they defeat Godzilla in the end is also very creative, and leads to one of the most chilling endings in any Godzilla film. I put this movie in great. Godzilla vs. Biollante continues the world, style, and aesthetic of Godzilla 1984 very well. And if Godzilla 84 is a modern 54, then vs. Biollante is a modern Raids Again, as both movies feature the main monster villain of the story being kinda cut out halfway through, and the main focus goes to Godzilla. Of course, until Biollante does at least show up again at the very end. While Biollante is much better than Raids Again, it still does suffer from the fact that Biollante is pretty absent. The Godzilla destruction scenes are pretty good, but not quite as good as the previous movie. The characters here are definitely more memorable though, and the stuff with Biomajor is pretty fun. But overall, it's honestly kind of boring. This is a good movie. Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. Much like King Ghidorah's first appearance in the Showa era, his appearance in this continuity completely destroys any realism set up in the previous movies. I have to give this movie credit for a pretty unique story. Having the villains be people from the future instead of aliens is pretty cool. However, the actual execution of everything was very poor. M11 is too strange to take the people of the future seriously, and the effects used on him are horrid. The stuff on Lagos Island is interesting, but I wish World War II in a Godzilla movie was taken a little more seriously. Both of Godzilla's fights against Ghidorah are excruciating to watch, and shot very poorly. Godzilla's rampage is fine, but it's not nearly as good as the ones from the last two movies. This movie was mid. Godzilla vs. Mothra was the first Godzilla movie I ever saw. At the time, it was good enough for me to get into the franchise, and now, I could say it's just fine. This is the most by-the-books Godzilla movie out of all the ones I've seen yet. It checks all the boxes without doing anything really exemplary. I could see why people would say it's too similar to the original Mothra vs. Godzilla movie, but honestly, I think it's different enough to the point where it's still kind of cool to see the story again. Especially with the inclusion of Battra, who I've always thought is pretty cool. The larva's rampage is funny to me though, because you never see the full body, so it kind of just looks like his big head floating around. The fights in this one are definitely better than the ones in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, however, I can't really say too much praise about them. There are some shots where both Mothra and Battra look pretty stiff. The human story was alright, with a decent amount of depth to it. The best parts of the movie were definitely when Mothra was on screen. When the Cosmos were singing for her to come to them, and she fought the destroyers in the water, or when she was cocooning, both beautiful scenes. This movie just barely makes it into the good tier because of that. Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla 2. This one's also fine. It's more original than the last one, but it's just about as entertaining for me. Baby Godzilla is adorable in this at least. He adds a lot to what would have been an otherwise pretty stale Godzilla film. I liked all the monster stuff in this except for the fights. Godzilla and Rodan's rampages in this are pretty darn cool, especially with the large amount of composite shots in them. But the moment the monsters make contact, it becomes a beam spam fest, and I fall asleep. The best fight in the movie is definitely the Godzilla and Rodan fight in the beginning, but even then it's not really that outstanding. This movie also just barely makes it into the good tier. Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla, or as I like to call it, Godzilla vs. Boredom. On paper, this movie sounds great. I've written in the script, which is paper, like the basic outline of the movie. So listen to this. A giant space monster with ridiculous size and power is headed towards Earth, and the cosmos warn Earth of the impending doom. An awesome new version of an obscure robot from the Showa era makes his return. The main character is someone with a crazed desire to kill Godzilla. He's put in charge of the new robot and goes rogue. The adorable baby Godzilla is kidnapped by the pure evil monster, and Godzilla gets his revenge. However, the execution is a snooze fest. The final battle is excruciating to sit through, partially because it's more than half the movie. Besides the opening stuff on the island, the rest of the movie is completely pointless and filler. I cheered when SpaceGodzilla died, simply because I just wanted the movie to be over! This movie is mid. Godzilla vs. Destoroyah brings the franchise back to the standards left off with Godzilla vs. Biollante. Unlike the Showa era, this actually goes all out for the ending. All the things that Heisei era got right were put together into one movie. Great effects, awesome designs, original ideas, callbacks to the original, beautiful music, etc. Of course, good human characters are not on that list because they were never a good part of the Heisei era, but they went all out with everything else. Godzilla's rampage through Hong Kong at the beginning of the movie is beautiful. All the colors really make it stand out compared to all the Godzilla rampages that came in the other movies. There's also just some amazing composite shots. The scenes of the human-sized Destoroyahs, whether it be the military fighting them or the reporter woman running away from them, were so tense and awesome. Godzilla Jr.'s battle against the aggregate destroyer was really cool too. The final battle also isn't a beam spam fest and is mostly physical contact between the monsters. It's great. I was so happy watching that. And Destoroyah dragging Godzilla across the airport is absolutely insane, especially after all the movies really building up how slow and heavy Godzilla is. Godzilla's death is also an absolutely beautiful send-off for the character with one of the best pieces of Godzilla music there is. This is a good movie. It would be great, but just like Godzilla vs. Biollante, it's kind of boring when the monsters aren't on screen. Godzilla 1998. What you don't understand is that Godzilla's like a worm. You see, when I watched this movie, I envisioned myself as a Godzilla fan seeing this for the first time in theaters in 1998. In the first 20 minutes or so, I was feeling good. The ship scenes were awesome. When Godzilla first attacked New York, I was really into it. The tiny glimpses we saw of the design felt off, but I was still enjoying it. The moment Godzilla gets revealed for the first time, I was very caught off guard. It didn't really feel like Godzilla, but I was still sort of into it. Right as you hit the hour mark though, everything goes downhill quick. The movie becomes a mess in every way. People always say it's a bad Godzilla movie, but a good monster movie. And they're wrong! I have to disagree with that mainly because of the scene with the baby Godzillas. It's so long and pointless, it's bad. I honestly think this is a Godzilla parody. I legitimately think that was the intention by the director, was to make an actual Godzilla parody. I'm convinced of it. This is a bad movie. Godzilla 2000, American version. This is the quintessential Godzilla movie. It has everything in it, and it works so well. The human characters are good and entertaining with surface level depth. Godzilla is a main force of nature that goes on a rampage and fights the military. The military thinks they have a new weapon that can defeat Godzilla, and they try it, but it doesn't work. There's an alien villain that Godzilla goes to fight. He has a duel with it, and then goes back to rampaging as classic Godzilla music plays. I love this movie. The Godzilla rampages are awesome and the miniatures look great. The fight as well is pretty cool. Orga has one of my favorite monster deaths of all time. The movie also just has one of my favorite Godzilla movie endings in general. The only real issue is the bad CGI. This is a great movie. Godzilla vs. MegaGodzilla. This is a movie that they made. They created this movie and it exists. It's not bad, but it's very okay. The human characters are incredibly bland and forgettable, and the story itself is really nothing that special. All this movie has going for it is the cool Megalon and Megalon scenes. They have really good build-up for the actual MegaGodzilla appearance, as well as the final battle, which is really fun. Godzilla is very expressive, and it's quite silly, so I'll put this in the good tier. Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, giant monsters, all out, attack! For years, this was my favorite Godzilla movie. Little me once rewatched the film 5 times in one day. And despite the fact it's been 5 years since I've rewatched it, I remember the entire movie like the back of my hand. Immediately, I was reminded why I liked it so much. The intense and serious atmosphere, the incredible soundtrack, the great characters, and the phenomenal monster designs. This movie has such a great style to it that I love. It's got a mysterious side to it, with the ghostly old man that never really gets any answers. I love it when movies do stuff like that. The soundtrack is one of my favorites ever. You bet I've listened to Godzilla's Rage probably 10 million times. If you go on YouTube, I guarantee more than half the view count is from me. The characters also have such heart to them that despite the fact that we ultimately didn't really get to spend that much time with them due to the movie not really being super long, I had tears in my eyes by the end. The movie does a really good job at making them feel like real people. And of course, the monsters. Easily one of my favorite Godzillas of all time with design alone, but his personality added onto it makes him unforgettable. unforgettable. With Baragon being so adorable, they basically play the killing the puppy card when Godzilla blows him to smithereens. It makes you hate Godzilla, and I love it. Godzilla being created from the souls of those affected by the Japanese during World War II is a really good way of tying Godzilla back to his roots without really being in your face about it. The final battle is awesome. Most of the action is alright, but it does feature some of my favorite moments in any Godzilla battle. For example, when Ghidorah becomes King Ghidorah, pretty awesome. And of course, I've always thought the way Godzilla gets defeated is perfect, showing that blind rage really doesn't work out in the end. This is a great movie. Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla takes a different route with the Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla concept. It makes an incredibly memorable movie out of it. The cinematography, sets, acting in this movie are all great. Cool moments like MechaGodzilla going berserk and when he does his landing slide against Godzilla are great additions. But what this movie has going for it the most so is story. Building MechaGodzilla around the original Godzilla's bones is a concept I've always found very interesting. I also really enjoyed the human side of this. I ended up really caring about the father and daughter's relationship in this movie. Akane was also great. Her fight to redeem herself throughout the movie made her easy to root for. And of course the soundtrack is incredible. This is a great movie. Godzilla Tokyo SOS has the power of the unique sequence. There are so many awesome moments in this movie that give it a great and unique experience that you can't find anywhere else. The prime example is obviously the scene with Mothra and the military at the beginning. As for the characters, they were overall weaker than the ones from the previous movie. However, I still enjoyed them. Bringing back a character from the original Mothra was pretty cool, and I'm glad they utilized that while they still could. The special effects, cinematography, and miniatures get upgraded from the last movie. It really was a peak in the franchise in terms of visuals. While it does have weaker characters than against MechaGodzilla, it makes up for it by getting better in literally every other way. This is also a great movie. Godzilla Final Wars. When I last watched this movie in 2019, I really didn't like it. Watching in 2023, I loved it! It's the perfect tribute to the Godzilla franchise for its 50th anniversary. To start, the opening credits are my favorite in any Godzilla film. I also love how much trolling there is throughout the movie. Between Zilla, the kid throwing Gamera into the fire, Manila driving the car, and Captain Gordon's entire character. It's the kind of thing you wouldn't actually expect to see in a real Godzilla movie, which makes it so funny. The movie feels big. The story is the grandest it's ever been. The human characters aren't super deep or anything, but they are wildly entertaining. The Zillions are so great, with the twist of the younger one killing his father actually being pretty cool. All the action is amazing in this, with fantastic monster designs, except King Caesar, featuring some of the best destruction and fight scenes in the franchise. Godzilla in this is incredible, and it's easily one of my favorite depictions of him ever. He feels like the king of the monsters. He feels like the ultimate heavyweight champion the 70s movies made him feel like. Between his monster murder rampage and the awesome ending, I was practically drooling the entire time. This is not only a great 50th anniversary film, but is the perfect send-off for classic Godzilla. This is a great movie. Classic Godzilla goes out with a bang! Godzilla 2014 has absolutely awesome monster scenes. Godzilla arriving to Hawaii with the flares is one of the coolest moments ever put to film. It really does make him feel like a god. His earth-shattering roar and regal designs are peak. It's like they took Godzilla 1998 and did the exact opposite, which was honestly a very smart thing to do. Of course, the movie does kind of fumble when it comes to the fights. Not because the actual fights are bad, but because they keep cutting away from them, which really kills the momentum. There's great moments in them, of course, like both of Godzilla's atomic breath scenes, but the actual action is a little lacking. The human story is also pretty decent. The first hour or so with Joe Brody is actually really great, and there is still some good momentum going after he dies. However, the closer you get to the end of the movie, the more it does start to feel like there's a hole in the film without him. The moment they ask Ford if he could remember anything his dad was studying, and he can't, really shows the problem. Godzilla 2014 gets a lot right with the world building, cinematography, soundtrack, and monster portrayal, but loses its footing with the latter half of the human story and the lack of monster fights. This is a good movie. Shin Godzilla is a modern reimagining of the original Godzilla 1954 concept, updated for the modern world. It gives us a look into what would happen if Godzilla appeared in real life. The film plays on the trope of one sane person plopped into a nonsensical system, with the main character Yaguchi, as he has to do with the slow and outdated Japanese government. A lot of the commentary is lost on me, the average American viewer, but I still found the humor in it. Watching them constantly switch rooms to talk about basically the same thing is pretty funny. And seeing that people's titles progressively get longer as the movie goes is also quite silly. The Godzilla stuff is phenomenal this go around. It updates him in such a good way that captures the horror of the original design and takes full advantage of modern technology. From the point Godzilla's fourth form comes ashore to when it eventually falls asleep after the atomic breath is my favorite rampage in any Godzilla movie. The cinematography throughout the movie is godly. I also love the music. The blend of old and new is something that could only work in a Shin movie. My only real complaint when it comes to the soundtrack is the fact that Persecution of the Masses didn't really fit over Kamada-kun. I also love how creative the way they defeat Godzilla is. This is a great movie. Godzilla Planet of the Monsters. I think everything I feel about this movie can be summed up into 4 words. I don't really care. Nothing about it was particularly bad, it just wasn't interesting. The main character is just mad all the time, and Godzilla Phileas was honestly kinda lame. The fights with him were just so repetitive. I also hated Medfeast. The only things I really liked about the movie was how they made the Earth connected to Godzilla, and obviously the Godzilla Earth attack scene. Although even both of those were pretty underwhelming in this. This movie's mid. Godzilla's sitting on the edge of battle. I think everything I feel about this movie can be summed up into 9 words. I cared a little bit more than last time. The world building in this movie is definitely a lot better. They actually make more use of the humans being allied with the aliens in this movie. We get to see more of their impact on how decisions are made, their differences in culture, and they have more of a presence in the story. The characters also feel a lot more fleshed out this go around, especially with Haruo. The visuals are also a lot better too. My main complaint with the movie though is that they set up MechaGodzilla and end up not using him. I would have been okay with this if the city had at least looked like MechaGodzilla, but it was just domes. Also, Godzilla's lack of screen time in this movie really starts to hit in the second half when the pacing slows down and it gets kinda boring. At least the fight against Earth is literally just a better version of the fight against Phileas from the last movie. This is a good movie, I'd say, despite its flaws. Godzilla Planet Eater. I think everything I feel about this movie can be summed up into 7 words. I actually did care this time. That's right, I quite enjoyed this one. It had a really cool concept that it brought to the table that I really liked. It's that the humans really only existed and were created by the Earth to bring monsters into existence. Also, all the character stuff was really interesting in this one for me. Lots of drama between the Bilisoludo, the Exif, the humans, and the Hotua. Tons of great character conflict. Although, it does come at the expense of the world building in this one. Ghidorah was really cool in this one. The concepts at play with how he exists and doesn't at the same time was really neat. The build up to his appearance is awesome as well. I also really appreciated the extended amount of Godzilla screen time here. It really adds to the gravity of everything, and it also led to some really beautiful shots. And finally, my hatred for Medfeast was justified. I really liked how they resolved his character. Although Haruo getting the -1 bad ending was a bit of a weird way to end everything. Still a good movie though. Godzilla King of the Monsters is the movie the Monsterverse was made for. I love it so much. Not only is it a great movie, it's a great sequel to 2014. It continues the world building in such an interesting way, implementing the Toho monsters so well. Seeing the Big Four as godly versions of themselves is truly legendary. Everything with the monsters is perfect in my eyes. The designs, action, music, it's all amazing. This movie has my favorite versions of both Ghidorah and Rodan. It would be Mothra too if she had more screen time, although I don't really think her lack of screen time is a problem. Every issue I had with the movie before, I no longer have. I also love the human story. I think Mark is a really good protagonist. I think his character arc of making peace with Godzilla is pretty cool. I understand Emma's actions perfectly, and I think it makes sense that someone like her would come to that conclusion. Madison was also a great character to me. I love the interactions she has with her mom, and I do really like how they made her integral to the story. Serizawa is undoubtedly the best part though. All the scenes with him are great, and the interaction he has with Mark on the sub is so well written. His sacrifice is a beautiful scene, one of the best in any Godzilla movie. Godzilla's rebirth scene is iconic, and the final battle is amazing. It does still have a bit of an issue with the cutaways, but it's easier to forgive here. Burning Godzilla is a phenomenal tribute, and the shot where all the monsters bow down to Godzilla is a beautiful way to end it. I love this movie, and I'm putting it in the great tier. Godzilla vs. Kong. Ultimately, every problem I have with the movie comes from what it changed between this and Godzilla King of the Monsters. I think the movie would benefit from being in its own little bubble, not connected to the Monsterverse. The human characters in this movie just aren't serious enough. They joke too much and don't feel like real people. Like when Bernie is like, I wanted to hear the rest of that speech, after MechaGodzilla murders someone in front of him. Sure, King of the Monsters had jokes, but they still felt like real people. G is the only character I really like due to the fact most of her scenes aren't really that goofy. If the entire movie was the same but the characters were taken more seriously, I probably would have liked it a little more. Although I would also remove that downloading energy plot point and add more to Ren Serizawa's character. Despite this, all of the monster fights were great. And it was really cool seeing them flow so well with so few cutaways. The Godzilla rampages were really cool, but I am a little iffy on the Kong stuff because I do feel like they made him feel a little too human. Like he yawns and then scratches his butt. Like, I don't know about all that. I still liked Kong in this movie though. I'm also glad MechaGodzilla was in this because it honestly would have been stupid to have a movie with Godzilla and Kong. It was potentially the end of the Monsterverse where they didn't team up. What I'll never understand are the blue explosions though. What was up with that? Why does no one ever talk about that? This is a good movie. Godzilla -1. I walked out of the theater and immediately said that was the best one. I've never been so amazed by a Godzilla film after watching it for the first time. The characters in this movie are the best ones in the entire franchise. After the movie came out, I couldn't get them out of my head. Shikishima is perfect. You immediately feel for him as it feels like the entire world was put on his shoulders from the very beginning. The beautiful and unique story built up between him and Noriko is so touching and powerful. The emotions they display along their journey are so strong. The way Shikishima yells when he thinks she dies is something I'll never forget. The part at the end of the movie where Shikishima flies his plane at Godzilla's resolution plays is one of my favorite moments in any Godzilla movie. It's so incredibly tense that I was literally biting my nails and on the edge of my seat. I love everyone else too. All his boat buddies have so much character. The captain was really fun. I loved the way he talked. The doc was really interesting as well. Godzilla in this movie is insane. The fear you feel when he is on screen is unmatched. When his atomic breath started to charge up in the water at the end of the movie, I started to freak out. I was like, no, stop, don't, that's when the bad things happen! There are just so many details this movie has that are worth noting. The Odo Island Godzilla at the beginning, the use of DC fish to build tension. Almost every character has a character arc, and the beautiful use of music, oh my god! The tense music over the beginning scene and the boat chase are bone-chilling. The first Godzilla suite over his rampage leaves such a feeling of awe, and the way Godzilla's theme starts to play at the beginning of the operation is simply beautiful. I could go on for hours talking about every single aspect of this movie I love, so I think at some point I'm going to have to make a separate review. This is a great movie. Woo! So that was 37 movies. No more! I'm sick of Godzilla! Here's all 4 tiers filled up. Great, good, mid, and bad. My 2 favorite Godzilla movies right now are Godzilla Final Wars and Godzilla -1. My least favorites are Godzilla Raids Again and Godzilla 1998. I was most impressed with Godzilla vs. Hedorah and Godzilla the Planet Eater. I was most let down with Destroy All Monsters and Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share the video around. This has been GPTV, finally understanding why I like Godzilla. I am now officially not a fake fan, and I'm signing off. See you next time.